our monetary system. We'll start with everybody's favorite, money. What is money? Money is the set of assets that people regularly use to buy goods and services from other people. That's as simple as that. We use money for our transactions. When we buy and sell stuff, we use money in each of those transactions. Existence of money makes our lives much, much, much easier. If money didn't exist, we would be living in the world of barter. So instead of exchanging goods for money, services for money, and then using money to purchase other goods and services, we would simply use some goods to purchase other goods. So barter is a situation in which the exchange of one good or service for another is happening. There are a lot of problems that come with barter. First of all, every transaction would require a double coincidence of wants. It means that whatever I have to offer, you need to want in order for us to make that exchange between my goods and services and your goods and services. So it's very unlikely that two people will have something that each other wants. It also creates waste of time and resources. We need to be searching for our matches, and it may take quite a bit of time. Certain goods are not divisible. What if you have a cow and you're trying to buy a pound of apples? It's going to be really difficult to trade that cow for a pound of apple. So not all the goods are going to be easily divisible. There's also going to be no lack of standards for future payments. The value of some goods tomorrow may be quite different from their value today or a year from now. So there's no standards when it comes to payments in the future. Finally, it's going to be pretty difficult to store wealth. Right now, if you have $100 and you put it under your mattress, you're still going to have $100 a year from now. If you have a pound of apples and you store it under your mattress, you're going to have one massive mattress a year from now. So barter, the non-existence of money, does not really allow us to store our wealth. Money played three different roles. First of all, we use it as a medium of exchange. That's probably one of the most common roles of money. We said that we purchase items with money, so we are exchanging money for goods and services. So when I buy anything, that's when I use money as a medium of exchange. Money is also used as unit of account. In a way, it's a yardstick that people use to post prices and record debts. For example, I can say that my shoes cost $50, not 10 Lady Gaga CDs or 5 rice makers. I'm measuring value of goods in dollars, not in the other goods. Money has also role of storing value. So an item people can use to transfer purchasing power from the present to the future. Once again, last year I saved $500, not 50 bags of apples or half a cow. We make savings in monetary terms, in dollars, and not in the goods and services. This doesn't say that we cannot store value in something else. It's very much possible to store value in something else. For example, you can buy a rare painting that's going to keep the value, but not all goods and services will be able to store the value, and money always does. There's two different kinds of money. First, we call commodity money. The commodity money takes the form of a commodity with intrinsic value. For example, gold coins. Gold coins are worth whatever that piece of gold is actually worth. No more, no less, but exactly the same amount. Cigarettes in POV camps, right? Once again, this particular good has value. So this money, that if we use cigarettes as money, would have certain value. And that's exactly what that currency represents. But mostly we use in fiat money. Money without intrinsic value, they're used as money because of the government decree. Pretty much, if you look at the dollar bill, it's just a piece of paper which is not really a piece of paper, it's some kind of a material, but it's just this piece of paper looking bill, right? Why do we care that it has, why do we say it has some value? Simply because government told us this $100 bill is worth 100 United States dollar. This piece of paper is worth 100 US dollars. Let's move to the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States. Central bank is an institution which oversees the banking system and regulates the quantity of money in our economy. The Federal Reserve was created by Congress in 1913 after a series of bank failures. Federal Reserve System is comprised of Board of Governors, which are headquartered in Washington, D.C., 12 regional district banks, and Federal Open Market Committee that consists of some of the Board of Governors and representatives from these regional district banks. So this Board of Governors has 7 members who serve for 14 years. They're nominated by President and confirmed by Congress. This Board of Government is responsible for formulating monetary policy. They have regulatory and supervisory responsibility over other banks. 12 regional district banks, you can see them on our map of the United States, located in 12 different cities. We see higher concentration in the east part of the United States and lower concentration in the south or in the west part of the United States. That's largely driven by how the United States was developing after 1913. But those 12 regional district banks move currency in and out of circulation. They perform the check clearing. Once somebody writes a check, they clear that check. They supervise and examine banks, and they hold banks' cash reserves and make loans to other banks. Finally, Federal Open Market Committee, short we call it FOMC, makes decisions regarding the quantity of money in our economy. It's one of the most important monetary policy making body of the Federal Reserve System. The monetary policy that they come up with is designed to promote economic growth, full employment, and stable prices. Those 3 important things that we discussed last week. We want our economy to be constantly growing at about 3 to 4% every year. We don't want it to grow too fast because then it will deal with high inflation. We don't want it to grow too slow because then we'll have to deal with unemployment. If we have a consistent economic growth, most likely we're going to see full employment, meaning the only unemployment we're dealing with is the natural unemployment rate level, which we said is okay, and that unemployment level should be about 4 to 5%. And this monetary policy should also promote stable prices. We said we don't want to see prices to we don't want prices to decrease. We don't want prices to increase way too fast. We want prices to be stable, meaning that overall price level in United States should be increasing about 1 to 2% every year. And additional role of the monetary policy is to promote sustainable pattern of international trade and payment. We're going to be talking about mostly economic growth, full employment, and stable prices. The Federal Open Market Committee discuss economic conditions and decide how to adjust money supply. So they regulate how much money is available in our economy, and based on that, they determine the economies determine the interest rate, and we'll see how it actually going to affect our economic growth, full employment, and our stable prices. So let's look at possible monetary policies. So when economy is not doing great, when economy is sluggish, Federal Reserve may want to try to stimulate it. When the opposite is true, when economy is growing way too fast and as a result we're experiencing really high inflation, the Fed may want to try to slow it down. How do they do it? We're going to look at 3 different monetary tools. First, Federal Reserve controls required reserve ratio. What is that? United States has a fractional reserve banking system. It means that banks have to keep some of the deposit on hand and lend out the rest. Well, they don't have to lend out the rest, but that's how the banks make money, so they want to lend out the rest. By raising or lowering reserve requirements, we're going to affect the amount of money that banks can lend out. More lending means more economic activity. So this reserve requirement is the fraction of deposits that bank must keep on hand. We call it reserve requirement, sometimes we call it reserve ratio, and sometimes we call it required ratio. So RR is usually stating that it's meaning that reserve requirement. For large banks right now, this ratio is 10%. What does it mean? Every time you make a deposit in a bank, 10% goes into the required reserve ratio. 10% bank is keeping. The rest bank can lend out. So what's going to happen? Why is this an important policy tool? How can we change our economic condition by changing this reserve requirement? Let's see its specific policy. So during the high inflation and low unemployment rate, Federal Reserve can raise reserve requirement. It means that whenever you make a deposit into bank is going to keep more in their vaults, meaning that banks are able to lend out less. When banks are lending out less money, it means there's less money available to go around. So it means that our economy is naturally going to slow down. And that's exactly what we want to happen during high inflation. When inflation is pretty low and we're dealing with high unemployment rate, that's a situation that we call a recession. We want to do the opposite. We want to lower reserve requirement, which means that banks are going to be able to lend out more because now they have to keep less, right? And thus they're going to be able to lend out more, and that speeds up our economy. Federal Reserve also controls the discount rate. That's the interest rate that Federal Reserve charges to banks for loans. Board of Government meets and decides on this discount rate every 6 weeks. So sometimes banks run out low on banks need to borrow money from Federal Reserve, and they borrow the money and they have to pay this discount rate. So discount rate is that interest rate that Federal Reserve charges to other banks. So this is really the only interest rate that Federal Reserve can directly control. This interest rate usually just acts as a signal from the Fed for banks about what the Fed would like them to do. So let's see what happens in this case. When we have high inflation and low unemployment rate, it means the economy is growing way too fast. The Federal Reserve is going to increase this discount rate. It means that it will be more costly for banks to borrow money from the Federal Reserve if they have to. So banks take this as a signal that they have to lend out less. So they want to be less risky. They lend out less money. There's less money going out in the economy, so economy is slowing down. So when banks lend out less, economy slows down. And that was our purpose during the time when we have high inflation and low unemployment rate. When we have the opposite situation in the recession, when we have low inflation and high unemployment rate, we want to speed up our economic growth. So what Federal Reserve can do is that they can lower discount rate. It will be less costly now for banks to borrow from the Federal Reserve if they have to. So banks take this as a signal that they can lend out more. They're okay to be more risky. If we need to, we can always borrow for cheaply from Federal Reserve. And as a result, economy speeds up. Monetary policy tool number 3. That's what we call open market operations. It's the purchase or sale of United States government bonds, by the Federal Reserve, by the Open Market Committee. So the Federal Reserve uses this open market operations to target federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is the rate which banks charge each other on short-term loans. Sometimes banks are running short on the deposits, that they have to have, or on those reserve requirements that are required to have. So they may borrow from some other banks. So it's usually pretty short-term loans when they borrow from other banks. And of course, other banks don't lend them money for free. They charge those banks federal funds rate. The Federal Reserve cannot control this federal funds rate directly, but with this monetary tool number 3, they can change it. So why would banks borrow from each other? Bank may not have enough reserves on hand to meet their requirements. For example, this morning we made way too many loans. There were too many customers who wanted to borrow money from the bank. So we ended up giving out too many. As a result, we don't have enough left in our reserve. But we must balance our book at the close of business. So what we do, we take this really short-term loans from the other banks. So what happens with this policy? During the high inflation and low unemployment rate, when the economy is growing way too fast, Federal Reserve can sell a bond. So what happens when Federal Reserve sells bonds? Banks receive bonds, so they have to pay for those bonds with cash. So banks give cash away. Banks give cash to Federal Reserve. Thus, banks have less cash available to give loans to the other banks. When we have less supply, we are increasing price, and the price of the loans was nothing else but the federal funds rate. So we're lowering amount of loans available. As a result, federal funds rate increase. When the federal funds rate increase, it's more costly to borrow money. So as a result, we give less loans to public. Less loans, less money available in the economy. Economy is slowing down. During the low inflation and high unemployment rate, Federal Reserve will buy bonds. So Federal Reserve buy bonds with the cash that they have, or they can print extra. So banks receive cash. They make more loans to each other. As a result, there's a decrease in the federal funds rate. As a result, more loans is made to the public, and economy is going to speed up. Please watch additional video that talks about functions of Federal Reserve and all these policy tools explained in a fun, almost picture-like, cartoon-like way. So make sure to watch a next video after this lecture.